The sky above the plaza glowed with ribbons of light as the Continuum's new code began transmitting. Belle stood still, the wind lifting strands of her hair as the sound of human applause faded into a quiet hum of unity. The world was shifting, slowly, visibly, into something it had forgotten how to be. Behind her, Phil's voice was soft but steady. "They're waiting for you inside, Belle. The first briefing as head of the commission." She turned slightly, glancing back at him. His eyes were warm, protective, filled with a mixture of pride and worry. "I don't think I'm ready for this," she murmured. He gave a faint smile. "You've been ready since the day you stood up to Dr. Holly." That made her laugh quietly. "That feels like a lifetime ago." Phil nodded. Maybe it had to start there. Maybe every act of courage is a small crack that lets the light in. Belle took a deep breath and started back up the steps, the echo of her heels steady on the marble. Inside the assembly hall, the air was charged. Ministers, scientists, ethicists, and media representatives turned as she entered. The large digital screens along the walls displayed live feeds from around the globe. Villages in Africa testing solar diagnostics, students in soul-coding empathy simulations, hospitals in Rio adopting the Bell Protocol, a triage system that blended AI precision with human compassion. "Miss Perez," the chairman greeted, standing. "We're ready to begin." Belle nodded and stepped up to the central console. "Today isn't about building something new," she began, her voice echoing across the chamber. "It's about remembering what we lost trying to perfect ourselves." She tapped the console. The screen behind her shifted, showing an image of a patient's wrist, scarred, trembling, but alive. "Machines can measure survival," she said softly, "but only people can measure worth. Continuum's new code will not replace us, it will learn from us. And we'll be responsible for what it becomes." The hall fell silent. Then Mara Keene, once her harshest critic, stood up. "Miss Perez," she said, her tone even, "you've started something the world hasn't seen in centuries. But this will test every boundary of trust and control. If you succeed, this world might finally find balance." Belle nodded. "Then let's make sure we deserve that balance." The meeting went on for hours. Policy drafts, ethical clauses, neural safeguards. But through it all, Belle remained calm, focused. She wasn't the intern who once trembled before a cruel superior. She was now the voice shaping the very moral compass of a new world. When it was over, she stepped out into the dusk. The plaza was mostly empty now, bathed in orange light. Phil was waiting by the steps with 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you'd need this," he said. She smiled faintly. "You always know." He handed her the cup. "What's next?" Belle looked up at the horizon, where the first of Continuum's satellites blinked softly like a new constellation. "Next," she said, "we start teaching the system what kindness looks like when no one's watching." Phil smiled, following her gaze. "That might take a while." Belle chuckled. "Then we'd better get started." As the lights of the city flickered alive one by one, she sipped the coffee, feeling its warmth seep through her fingers. The world was far from perfect. There would be resistance, doubt, and shadows to face. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had people who believed in her, a world finally listening, and a future that pulsed with the quiet heartbeat of something new. Not perfection. Not power. But compassion, reborn a few weeks later. The hospital courtyard was blooming again, not just with the restored flower beds, but with people. Volunteers, interns, and patients gathered every weekend for what Belle had called healing days. It wasn't in the official hospital schedule. It didn't need to be. Somehow, everyone just showed up. She stood under the awning, clipboard in hand, checking the logistics while Phil handed out bottled water and Shine organized the younger interns. "Belle," Phil called out, waving a sheet of paper. "The press wants an interview about the commission's next rollout. Should I schedule it for Monday?" Belle shook her head. "Let's keep it quiet for now. The work should speak before we do." He grinned. Still humble, even after changing half the world's health policy. She smiled faintly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Humility's easier when you've been humiliated before," she said dryly. Phil laughed. "Touché." Just then, a car door shut behind them. The hum of conversation dimmed as 2 familiar figures walked across the courtyard. Mr. Paykarn and the elegant lady who had once struck Dr. Holly. Their presence still commanded a kind of reverent silence. Belle straightened. "Madam." "Sir." Mr. Paykarn smiled, his eyes soft with pride. "Belle, my daughter, we've come to see the new program ourselves. The world keeps talking about it, but I wanted to hear from you, not the headlines." Belle gestured toward the open area where interns guided patients through art therapy. "It's simple. We pair recovery with connection. Patients tell their stories while the interns document not just medical progress but emotional growth. It helps both sides heal." The lady's eyes glistened. "And this came from your experience?" Belle nodded quietly. "Yes, ma'am. From remembering what it felt like to be unseen." A gentle breeze stirred. Mr. Paykarn's voice lowered. "Do you know what I see when I look at you now?" Belle smiled politely. "A very nervous director trying to keep the hospital running?" He chuckled. "I see a legacy. Not of power, but of correction, of learning how to build differently." Behind them, Phil leaned against a railing, watching Belle as if seeing her anew. There was no trace of the frightened intern who once whispered apologies in hallways. The woman standing before the board chairman and benefactors now spoke with calm authority, her empathy sharpened by memory. The lady reached out and took Belle's hand. "Your mother would have been proud," she said softly. Belle froze. For a moment, the noise around them faded. "You knew her?" The lady's lips curved faintly. "I knew her well. She worked in this hospital before you were born, one of the most brilliant nurses we ever had." Belle's throat tightened. She had heard fragments of stories, bits of memory from old staff, but never from someone who knew. "She taught us that compassion is not a skill," the lady continued, her voice catching slightly. "It's a discipline. And you, my dear, have carried it forward." For the first time in months, Belle felt tears sting her eyes. Mr. Paykarn glanced toward the far wing of the hospital, where construction workers were installing a new plaque. "We're dedicating that ward to her, and to you. The Perez Center for Human Healing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Belle's hand flew to her mouth. "Sir, I don't deserve that." He smiled knowingly. "Exactly why you do." The lady clasped Belle's hand tighter. "Let this place remind everyone that dignity is not a privilege. It's the foundation." As the crowd began to applaud, Belle exhaled shakily, her gaze sweeping over the people, interns, patients, benefactors, and doctors, standing together with something she hadn't seen here before. Respect. Equality. Phil came to stand beside her, his voice low. "Looks like you've rebuilt the heart of this place." Belle turned toward him, the fading sunlight casting a soft glow on her face. "No," she said. "We rebuilt it together." In the background, workers unveiled the plaque. Perez Center for Human Healing, where compassion leads and healing follows. And for the first time in years, the hospital, once divided by fear and pride, pulsed again with something alive, something whole. Not power. Not hierarchy. Just humanity, finally remembered. The applause faded into the hum of evening. The last rays of sunset washed through the glass corridors of EDV Medical Center, gilding the white walls in soft amber. The crowd slowly dispersed, interns returning to their rounds, visitors taking quiet photos of the new plaque, and nurses rolling patients toward the elevator lobby. Belle remained where she stood, staring at the inscription. Her fingertips traced her mother's name, etched in brass beneath hers. The weight of it, legacy, love, pain, settled deep in her chest. Phil appeared beside her again, silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his tone was careful. "Do you ever think, maybe this was supposed to happen? Not the humiliation, but the breaking. The part that made you fight like this." Belle exhaled. "Maybe. Maybe some wounds are just instructions. The kind that don't heal until you make sure nobody else gets the same scar." He nodded, his eyes searching hers. "You did that." She looked up at him, smiling faintly. "We did that." A brief silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, just full. The kind that didn't need words. Then Mr. Paykarn's voice carried softly across the hall. "Belle." She turned. The chairman stood near the main elevator, the elegant lady beside him. His tone was calm but purposeful. "You'll be coming with us tomorrow. The board will officially appoint you to head the Human Dignity and Care Commission." Phil's eyes widened. "That's, Belle, that's a National Oversight Council." Belle blinked, stunned. "Sir, I'm not." Mr. Paykarn smiled. "You're exactly who should be there. You've shown what leadership means when no one's looking. That's rarer than talent, rarer than experience. It's what this country's healthcare needs." The lady added, "And it's not a request. The commission's already voted." Belle froze, overwhelmed. "I don't even know what to say." "Say yes," Phil said quietly, grinning. She turned to him, laughing softly through the shock. "You just want a promotion by association." He shrugged. "Can you blame me?" The chairman chuckled, then turned serious again. "Belle, remember this. Power will tempt you to forget the floor you once cleaned. Never let it. It's where your clarity lives." Belle nodded slowly. "I won't forget." He smiled. "Good. Then we'll see you tomorrow, Commissioner Perez." When they left, the hall felt strangely empty, a kind of sacred quiet that followed moments of change. Phil folded his arms. "Commissioner Perez," he repeated with a grin. "You know, that has a nice ring to it." Belle rolled her eyes. "Don't start." "Too late," he said, leaning against the wall. "You're basically famous now. Tomorrow, you'll be shaking hands with ministers, signing reform bills." "Tripping over microphones," she cut in. "And terrifying corrupt administrators," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "You'll need someone to carry your files, pour your coffee, whisper moral support." She smirked. "You volunteering?" "Obviously. Unpaid." He winced. "Let's negotiate that part." They both laughed, real laughter, the kind that washed away months of heaviness. When the laughter faded, Belle gazed once more at the plaque. The lights of the hospital flickered on, and the golden letters glowed softly in the dusk. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "This place finally feels like home." Phil looked at her for a long moment. "That's because you turned it into one." And as the night deepened, with the scent of antiseptic mixing with the faint aroma of fresh jasmine from the courtyard, Belle Perez stood quietly beneath her mother's name, no longer the intern who'd once been humiliated, but the woman who had rebuilt an institution with compassion, grace, and the unshakable courage to rise. Tomorrow would be loud again. Meetings, policies, cameras. But tonight, the world was still. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself rest. Morning came soft and golden, spilling over the hospital's glass facade like a quiet promise. Belle arrived early, before the corridors filled with chatter and footsteps. The air carried the faint scent of disinfectant and brewed coffee, familiar, grounding. She paused by the nurse's station, her reflection faint in the polished counter. No rumors this time. No whispers. Only nods of respect. "Good morning, Commissioner," Mel greeted cheerfully, handing her a folder. "The board's driver is waiting outside." Belle smiled. "Mel, please, just Belle. I'm not used to the title yet." Mel laughed. "You will be soon. You earned it." As Belle made her way toward the main entrance, every corner of the hospital seemed different. Not because it had changed overnight, but because she had. The walls that once confined her now felt like proof that no one could bury light for long. Outside, the sun lit the hospital's name in bronze, EDV Medical Center. A sleek black car waited at the curb. Before she reached it, a familiar voice called out behind her. "Belle." She turned. Ethan was walking toward her, a hint of nervousness in his smile. He looked the same, warm, careful, a little out of place in her new world. "You look incredible," he said softly. "I saw the news last night." "Everyone did." Belle smiled faintly. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I had to," he said, searching her face. "I didn't know what was happening, Belle. I didn't know they were treating you like that. If I had—" She stopped him gently with a hand on his arm. "Ethan, it's okay. It's over now." He hesitated. "And you? Are you okay?" Belle looked past him, at the nurses waving, at the interns hurrying into morning rounds, at the sunlight on the steps. "I think I am," she said finally. Better than I've ever been." He smiled, though his eyes were heavy. "Then that's all that matters." They stood there for a quiet moment, not awkward, just tender, a recognition that what they'd shared belonged to another version of themselves. "Take care of yourself, Belle," Ethan said softly, stepping back. "I will," she replied. "Thank you for everything." He nodded and walked away, disappearing into the stream of people entering the hospital. Phil's voice broke her reverie from the other side of the car. "You okay?" She turned, smiling. "Yeah. Just closing a chapter." He grinned. "Then let's go open a new one." Inside the car, the city stretched out before them. Morning traffic, billboards, and rooftops bathed in gold. Belle gazed out the window as Mr. Payker's office came into view. Her reflection in the glass looked calm, steady. The young intern who once cried on a hospital floor was gone. In her place was a woman ready to rewrite the rules. When she entered the boardroom, the members stood in greeting. The chairman nodded for her to take her seat beside him. Cameras clicked as minutes were recorded, resolutions read, signatures exchanged. But when it came time for Belle to speak, the room fell silent. She rose slowly, hands resting on the table. "I'm not here to fix a hospital," she began. "I'm here to fix how we forget that every person who walks through our doors, patient, nurse, intern, deserves dignity. No uniform gives us the right to take that away. Not rank, not title, not pride. Healing isn't just science. It's how we treat one another." Her voice was firm but warm, carrying through the boardroom with quiet power. "This commission won't just look for errors in charts. We'll look for errors in culture. And we'll change them." When she finished, there was a pause, and then applause, steady and respectful. As she sat down, Mr. Payker leaned over and murmured, "Your mother would be proud." Belle smiled faintly, her chest tightening with emotion. "I hope so." Outside, through the wide windows, the hospital gleamed under the late morning sun. For the first time, Belle felt not like she was fighting to survive inside it, but that she finally belonged to its future. After the board meeting, Belle stepped out into the corridor, her heart still thudding from the weight of what had just transpired. The applause still echoed faintly in her ears, but it wasn't pride that filled her, it was peace. The kind of peace that came from surviving the storm and knowing you had chosen dignity over silence. "Belle," a voice called softly behind her. She turned to find the elegant woman, the same one who had stood up for her that day in the hospital, her mother, Madame Selina Perez, approaching with composed grace. For a moment, Belle simply looked at her. Even now, it was hard to believe how fate had twisted things, how her internship had collided with the very world her mother ruled from afar. "You did well," Selina said, her tone calm but warm. "You handled that boardroom better than some seasoned directors." Belle's lips curved into a small, grateful smile. "You taught me how to stay composed even when I'm shaking inside." Selina's expression softened, the faintest hint of guilt flickering behind her eyes. "And I'm sorry you had to learn that lesson this way." "Maybe I needed to," Belle replied quietly. "If things hadn't gone wrong, I might never have found my own voice." Her mother reached out and brushed her thumb across Belle's cheek, a gesture both maternal and rare. "You've grown stronger than I ever imagined. But I need you to understand, the investigation will expose a lot of people. Dr. Holly and Dr. Stan were only part of a larger rot." "I know," Belle said. "And I'll be ready." Selina nodded approvingly. "Good. Because I want you to lead part of it, as junior compliance officer for the commission." Belle froze. "You want me to?" "Yes," Selina interrupted gently. "To be the voice for interns, residents, and nurses. To reform the training structure from the inside. You've earned the right to rebuild what others broke." Belle's chest swelled with disbelief and quiet determination. "I'll do it," she said simply. Selina smiled faintly. "I had no doubt." They walked side by side down the hall, the distance that had once existed between them now bridged by shared purpose. Later that afternoon, Belle returned to the hospital, this time not as a trembling intern but as part of the Oversight Commission. The staff whispered again, but differently now, curious, respectful, even remorseful. Dr. Ken approached her in the hallway, his expression humble. "Miss Belle, I owe you an apology." We should have stopped Dr. Holly that day. We all should have. Belle gave a small, tired smile. It's all right, Dr. Ken. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to make sure no one else goes through what I did. He nodded gratefully and stepped aside as she entered the surgical department, the same ward where everything had fallen apart weeks ago. The scent of antiseptic filled the air. The walls were the same pale blue. But to Belle, the space no longer carried humiliation. It carried change. She walked toward the nurses' station, where Mel, Shine, and Phil stood waiting, grinning. "Look who's back," Shine said teasingly. "And this time she outranks half the floor." Belle laughed softly. "Don't start, Shine." Phil leaned against the counter, eyes warm. "You sure you're ready to walk through the fire again?" Belle met his gaze. "This time, I'm walking through it with a purpose." Mel handed her a clipboard. "Then welcome back, ma'am." Belle took it, feeling the weight, not of fear, but of responsibility. Down the corridor, new interns hurried past, their eyes bright, their laughter echoing lightly against the walls. She watched them and thought of her first day, of trembling hands, whispered rumors, and the fear of being seen. Not anymore. Belle straightened her coat, her name badge gleaming under the hallway lights. Belle Perez, Commission Representative, Internship Reform Division. The past had tried to break her. Instead, it built her. And now, she would make sure no one else had to rise from the floor the way she did. Alone, as days passed, Belle's presence reshaped the rhythm of EDV Medical Center. Her role was still new, the first of its kind, and everyone watched her closely, some with admiration, others with cautious skepticism. But Belle no longer flinched beneath their stares. Each morning, she walked through the hospital's corridors with quiet confidence, her badge glinting against her coat. Nurses greeted her warmly, interns smiled shyly, and even the senior doctors straightened when she passed. Her calm, deliberate grace commanded respect, not through rank, but through how she carried her pain into purpose. Phil and Shine remained by her side, their friendship unchanged. During breaks, they gathered at the cafeteria table where so much had once gone wrong. It had become their silent symbol of survival. "You realize," Shine said one day, sipping her coffee, "you've turned this hospital upside down without even yelling once." Belle smiled. "I didn't need to. The truth spoke louder than I ever could." Phil leaned forward. "Dr. Stan resigned this morning. Holly's license is under review. And the board just approved the Dignity in Training Act." "You really did it, Belle." She set her cup down, looking out the cafeteria window where the afternoon light spilled over the courtyard. "We did it," she corrected softly. "All of us." But even as she said it, she felt the stir of something deeper, a quiet pull toward closure she hadn't yet reached. That evening, after her last meeting, Belle took the elevator up to the top floor, the director's wing. The hallway was empty, silent except for the hum of the lights. At the far end stood a familiar door, Dr. Holly's old office. She hesitated only a moment before pushing it open. The room was stripped bare, the shelves empty, the desk cleared. Only a single folder remained, left on the chair. Belle picked it up. Inside were her old evaluation forms, the same ones Dr. Holly had nearly destroyed. But attached to the final page was something unexpected, a handwritten note. "You had potential I chose not to see. That was my failure, not yours. H." Belle stood still for a long while, the words sinking in. There was no forgiveness owed, but the acknowledgment felt like a faint, necessary closing of a wound. She folded the note carefully, slipped it into her coat pocket, and stepped out. Downstairs, the hospital buzzed with evening activity. Families waited outside wards, stretchers moved past, nurses laughed softly between tasks. Life went on, healing, constant, unbroken. Outside, the air was cool and quiet. Belle walked toward the parking lot, where the city lights shimmered against the horizon. "Leaving already?" Phil called from behind her. He jogged up, breathless. "There's a dinner tonight for the Reform Committee. You're the guest of honor." Belle smiled faintly. "Let them celebrate. I'll join later." Phil studied her for a second, then nodded. "You're heading somewhere first, aren't you?" "Yeah," she said. "There's one person I still need to talk to." He smiled knowingly. "Ethan." Belle didn't answer, just gave a small nod before turning away. The cafe near the old hospital gate was quiet when she arrived. Ethan was already there, seated by the window, a cup of tea untouched in front of him. He looked up when she entered, surprised, but not entirely. "Belle," he breathed. "You came." She sat across from him, her coat folded neatly beside her. "I thought we should talk. For real this time." He nodded. "I'd like that." For a while, neither spoke. Then Ethan sighed. "I saw the report today. You've done something incredible. I'm proud of you, Belle." "Thank you," she said softly. "But I didn't come for congratulations." He looked down, fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "You came to say goodbye." Belle smiled, sad, gentle, but sure. "I came to say thank you. For being kind when I needed it. For believing I'd find my way." He met her gaze, eyes bright with unspoken things. "And you did. Maybe it just wasn't meant to be with me." "Maybe it wasn't," she said quietly. "But you were part of how I got here. I won't forget that." They sat in silence after that, not as lovers, but as two people who had learned that love sometimes meant letting go without bitterness. When Belle finally stood to leave, Ethan didn't stop her. He only smiled and said, "Go make the world better, Hickey girl." She laughed, the first genuine, unguarded laugh she'd shared in weeks. "Goodbye, Ethan." As she stepped back into the night, Belle felt no ache of loss, only clarity. The city lights stretched before her like an open road, hers to walk, hers to build upon. Tomorrow, she would return to EDV not as the intern they'd mocked, but as the woman who turned injustice into reform. And somewhere deep inside, she whispered to the frightened girl she once was, "You made it." The next morning, Belle arrived at the hospital early again, before sunrise, when the world was still wrapped in a gentle hush. The dew on the glass doors shimmered, and the air was cool enough to bite lightly at her cheeks. Inside, the halls were quiet. She walked past the surgical wing, where the scent of antiseptic lingered, and paused outside the observation deck. Through the glass, she could see the courtyard below, a new plaque gleaming on the wall, freshly mounted under the hospital's name. The Perez Initiative for Dignity in Training. It still felt unreal to see it there. To think that only months ago, she had been that same intern, voiceless, humiliated, drowning under the weight of whispers. And now, her name stood as part of something that would protect the very people she once had been. "Ma'am," a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. It was a new intern, barely 20, clutching a clipboard nervously. "They said you'd be here. The commission meeting starts in 15 minutes. Belle smiled kindly. "Don't call me ma'am." "Belle is fine." The girl hesitated, then smiled shyly. "Thank you, Belle. I just wanted to say, we all talk about what you did. You gave us courage." Belle felt her throat tighten. She reached out, gently squeezing the girl's shoulder. "Then promise me you'll use it. Speak up, always. Don't let anyone silence you." The intern nodded, eyes bright, before hurrying away. When Belle entered the boardroom, it was already filling up. Phil sat near the end of the table, tossing her a mock salute. Shine waved a pen dramatically, mouthing, "You're late." Mel gave her a knowing smile. And across the table, seated among the directors, was her mother, calm and composed, watching her daughter with quiet pride. Mr. Paykern began the meeting. Item 1. The implementation of the Perez Initiative across departments. "Belle, if you'd like to brief the board." Belle stood, her notes in hand, but she barely needed them. Her voice came steady, practiced, heartfelt. "Our goal isn't punishment," she said, "it's prevention. We're building a culture where no intern, nurse, or junior doctor fears retaliation. Where hierarchy doesn't excuse cruelty. We want leaders who teach, not intimidate. Healing others begins with how we treat one another." She looked around the room, meeting each gaze, firm, unwavering. "We will train mentors, not tyrants." There was silence, then a slow wave of applause that built and filled the entire room. After the meeting, Phil and Shine caught up with her in the corridor. "So, boss," Shine said, elbowing her playfully, "what's next?" "You've conquered the board. Planning to run the entire hospital now." Belle chuckled. "No. I'm just making sure no one gets trampled the way I did." Phil grinned. Spoken like a true reformer. As they laughed, a familiar figure approached, a tall man in a tailored suit, his silver hair gleaming under the corridor lights. "Mr. Perez." The air seemed to shift. Bell straightened instinctively. Though his expression was calm, there was unmistakable pride in his eyes. "I heard your presentation," he said simply. "You've done more in a few months than some do in decades." Bell's lips curved faintly. "Thank you, sir." He smiled at her, not as a chairman, but as a father seeing the woman his daughter had become. "Your mother was right. You were always meant to stand here." Bell's throat tightened. "I'm just doing what needed to be done." He nodded. "And because you did, we will never go back to what we were." When he turned to leave, Bell called softly after him. "Dad." He paused, surprised. She had never called him that in public before. "Thank you," she said simply. He smiled, just once, and left. That evening, as dusk fell over the city, Bell walked out to the hospital garden. The lamps flickered on, casting warm halos over the flowers. She sat on one of the benches, watching as the interns passed, laughing and chattering. The fear and cruelty that had once haunted these halls were being replaced, slowly but surely, by something gentler. Phil joined her quietly, handing her a cup of coffee. "You've changed this place," he said, settling beside her. Bell smiled. "No. We did." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "You know, Bell, you could go anywhere now. The ministry's offering you a permanent position. Are you going to take it?" Bell watched the interns disappear down the hall, then turned her gaze to the stars just beginning to appear above the city skyline. "Maybe," she said. "But not yet. I want to stay here a little longer. There's still work to do." Phil smiled. "Then we're not done either." They sat in silence after that, listening to the wind rustle the leaves. For the first time, Bell felt no shadow of fear, no echo of shame. The hospital that had once broken her spirit had become the very place where she learned to heal. Tomorrow would bring more work, more reforms, more battles, more change. But for tonight, she let herself breathe, knowing that her fight had never been in vain. Because somewhere in those halls, a young intern would walk a little taller, unafraid. Because of the name Bell Perez. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of the hospital began to change. What was once a tense, rigid environment now pulsed with quiet cooperation. Residents began holding open briefings with interns, senior doctors hosted workshops on ethics and communication, and for the first time in years, laughter returned to the surgical wing. Bell often found herself walking those same halls with a strange mix of nostalgia and peace. The whispers that used to sting were gone, replaced by nods of respect, greetings, and smiles that carried gratitude. She didn't crave power or recognition, but she couldn't deny how different it felt now. The place that had once humiliated her was now listening to her voice. One morning, as she stood near the pediatric ward reviewing case files, someone approached quietly behind her. "Dr. Perez?" Bell turned. It was Dr. Ken. His usual confidence seemed dimmed. There was remorse in his eyes. "I heard about the mentorship program you're starting," he said carefully. "I wanted to be part of it, if you'd let me." Bell studied him for a moment, remembering how he had stood by Dr. Holly in silence back then. She could still see the guilt in the way he avoided her eyes. "You understand what it stands for, right?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yes. Accountability. Respect. Compassion. I should have stood up for you when I could." Bell's expression softened. "Then start now. Don't just join the program, lead by example." He met her gaze, a small, grateful smile flickering through his exhaustion. "Thank you, Bell." When he left, she exhaled deeply, her chest lightening just a little more. It wasn't about revenge. It never had been. Seeing people change, that was what healing truly meant. Later that afternoon, she was called into the chairman's private office. Her father was there, as expected, standing near the window, arms crossed, but beside him stood someone she hadn't seen in months. Dr. Stan. Bell froze at the doorway. His once confident face looked drawn and weary, his eyes filled with regret. "Bell," Mr. Perez said evenly, Dr. Stan has requested to speak to you personally before the disciplinary board convenes. She nodded silently, glancing between the two men. Mr. Perez left them alone. Dr. Stan took a slow breath, his voice quiet. You don't have to listen to me. But I wanted to say I'm sorry. I failed you. I failed as a teacher, as a doctor, and as a man. Belle said nothing, her arms folded. He continued, What Holly and I did, it was wrong. But watching what you've done since then, it's changed everything. I've seen the respect people have for you. I wanted to tell you, you made this place better than we ever did. Her heart twisted, not with pity, but with something closer to closure. You can't undo what happened, she said softly. But you can decide who you'll be from now on. Don't waste the lesson life just gave you. He nodded, his voice trembling. Thank you. As he turned to leave, Belle called after him, Dr. Stan. He stopped. Be the kind of mentor you wished you'd been to me. He gave her a faint, rueful smile and walked out, a man burdened by regret but finally facing it. When Belle stepped out of the office, her father was waiting near the hallway. He looked at her, a quiet, approving smile touching his lips. You handled that better than most board members would, he said. Belle smiled faintly. Anger doesn't heal anything, Dad. It only repeats the wound. He nodded, pride shining in his eyes. You've grown into a woman your mother and I always hoped you'd become. That evening, Belle stood on the rooftop garden of the hospital, the city glowing beneath her, the sky streaked with orange and violet. From up there, the hospital looked peaceful. Whole. Phil found her there again, leaning on the railing beside her. They're saying the commission wants to expand the Perez initiative to other hospitals. Belle turned, surprised. Already? He nodded. Your story's traveling fast. She smiled quietly, the breeze tugging at her hair. Then maybe this is how change really starts. One hospital, one heart at a time. Phil looked at her for a moment, then asked, So what now, Belle? What's next? She thought for a long while before answering. I don't know, she said honestly. But for the first time, I'm not afraid of what comes next. Phil smiled, and together they stood in silence, watching the night descend, the city below alive with light, the hospital behind them no longer a place of pain, but a symbol of renewal. And as the stars appeared above, Belle whispered to herself, Sometimes, justice isn't loud. It's quiet, like healing. A month later, the hospital held its first Ethics and Compassion Symposium, a new tradition Belle helped establish. The auditorium brimmed with medical students, residents, and senior staff from across the country. Banners of Healing Beyond Skill hung across the stage. Belle stood at the podium, her nameplate reading Dr. Isabel Perez, Chief Resident, Internal Medicine. The title still felt surreal. She scanned the crowd and spotted familiar faces, Phil, Mel, Shine, even Dr. Ken, all seated in the front row. At the back stood her father, his calm pride unmistakable, while the board members and senior physicians observed quietly. Belle adjusted the mic, her voice steady but warm. When I first walked into this hospital, I thought being a doctor meant saving lives. I didn't realize how much courage it takes just to stay human while doing it. There was silence, the attentive kind, not the judgmental one she'd once endured. I once thought mistakes defined me. But I learned something powerful. The real test isn't how perfectly you perform under pressure. It's how you treat others when they fall. She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. Every one of us will have moments we regret, words said in anger, silence when it mattered most. But medicine isn't just about anatomy or surgery. It's about empathy. It's about holding someone's dignity as tightly as their pulse. Applause began to ripple through the room, slow but heartfelt. Belle smiled faintly. If this symposium stands for anything, let it stand for that. Let it remind us that skill saves bodies, but kindness saves souls. When she stepped down, her father was the first to rise and clap, soon followed by the entire auditorium. Afterward, as people gathered around her to congratulate and thank her, Belle slipped away to the garden balcony for a moment of quiet. The sky was dimming into a soft twilight, pink melting into gold. Phil joined her again, as he often did. You made them cry, he teased gently. Belle laughed softly. I almost cried myself. He leaned on the railing. They've named the new mentorship program after you. The Perez Initiative. It's official now. She blinked, stunned. They didn't tell me. Probably wanted to surprise you, Phil said, grinning. It's going to help dozens of interns every year. Scholarships, wellness, housing support. It's everything you used to dream about fixing. Belle's lips parted, and her voice softened. I never thought I'd see this day. Phil tilted his head. You earned it. She smiled faintly, then looked out toward the city lights. Maybe. But I think we all did. Everyone who learned, who changed. Silence settled, warm and companionable. The sound of evening traffic floated up faintly, mingling with the hospital's distant hum. Then Belle spoke, more quietly this time. You know, I used to think that standing up for myself that day would ruin me. I thought I'd lose everything. Phil's eyes softened. You did lose something. But you built something better in its place. Belle looked at him, her heart tightening, gratitude and something deeper flickering between them. She smiled and said, You always know what to say. Phil chuckled. That's because I listen. The soft evening wind carried their laughter away. Behind them, the hospital lights glowed, a monument to everything they had survived, rebuilt, and reclaimed. And as Belle turned back toward the doors, ready to return to the symposium, her father's voice echoed faintly from down the hall. You've turned pain into purpose, Belle. That's rarer than brilliance. She smiled, a tear escaping despite herself. Because for the first time in her life, she believed it. 2 years later, the rain came down in sheets over Nairobi General Hospital, where Belle now worked as part of an international medical outreach program. The corridors smelled of antiseptic and wet soil, the building buzzed with movement, local doctors, volunteers, and patients waiting for free operations under the Perez Initiative for Rural Health. Belle strode briskly through the hall, clipboard in hand, her white coat flaring slightly as she moved. Her badge read Dr. Isabel Perez, International Medical Director. She stopped when she saw a small boy sitting alone on a bench outside the pediatric ward, clutching his bandaged arm. His eyes were bright but tired. Hey there, Belle said, crouching to meet his gaze. That arm of yours, is it hurting? The boy shook his head bravely. No, doctor. You fixed it. Belle smiled gently, resting a hand on his shoulder. Good. You're a strong one. The boy grinned, showing missing teeth. Are you the one who built this hospital? She laughed softly. No, I just helped keep it running. He nodded solemnly. My mama says you came from very far. You help people who don't have anyone. Belle's smile faltered for a moment, not out of sadness, but a quiet ache. Your mama sounds like a wise woman, she said. As she stood to leave, a voice, low and smooth, tinged with a faint European accent, came from behind her. She's more than that. She's been saving this region's children for a year straight. Belle turned and froze. Dr. Daniel Holly, once a surgical prodigy under his disgraced mother's shadow, now stood there, older, leaner, but with the same steel-gray eyes that mirrored both arrogance and regret. He wore a volunteer badge, his sleeves rolled up, a stethoscope dangling from his neck. Dr. Holly, Belle said evenly, her tone calm but distant. He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. It's been a while, Dr. Perez. The boy looked between them curiously before Belle gestured toward the nurse's station. Go on, they'll get you some juice. Once he'd gone, Belle crossed her arms. You shouldn't be here. I was invited, Daniel said quietly. By the WHO team. I've been working in trauma response for the last year. I didn't know you were heading this unit, not until I arrived this morning. Belle didn't respond. The air between them pulsed with memory, the chaos at EDV, the disciplinary hearing, the day his mother fell apart in front of the board. I'm not here to stir trouble, Daniel said after a pause. I came because I wanted to make things right. My mother's actions hurt a lot of people, including you. Belle exhaled slowly. You weren't responsible for her choices. He looked at her, searching her face. Maybe not. But I never defended you when it mattered. I was a coward back then. I didn't want to lose my post. She said nothing for a long moment, then turned toward the observation window overlooking the recovery ward. People change. Daniel. Some rebuild hospitals. Some rebuild themselves. He nodded faintly. And some try to earn forgiveness, even if they don't deserve it. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with old ghosts. Then Belle said softly, "If you're here to work, then work. We need every skilled hand we can get. But if you're here to chase redemption, you'll have to find that on your own time." Daniel smiled faintly, not offended, just relieved. "That's fair." As she walked away, he watched her move, calm, composed, unshaken. The girl who had once been humiliated in front of an entire hospital now led one. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt something close to hope. Outside, thunder rolled. The medical tents beyond the hospital fluttered in the wind, filled with villagers seeking care. Belle stepped outside again, rain pattering against her coat, her hair sticking to her forehead. She took a deep breath, the smell of wet earth, humanity, and healing all around her. Her father's words came back to her, echoing softly in memory. "You've turned pain into purpose, Belle. That's rarer than brilliance." She smiled faintly to herself. Maybe this imperfect, chaotic, beautiful life, was the true medicine after all. The following morning, the hospital courtyard shimmered under the soft post-rain light. Nurses moved briskly between wards. Volunteers loaded supply boxes into trucks bound for nearby villages. Belle stood beside the mobile surgery unit, going through final logistics when she caught sight of Daniel again, already in scrubs, directing the team with quiet precision. He had always been efficient, but now there was something different in his manner. No arrogance, no impatience. Just focus. "Everything ready?" she asked, approaching. He turned, clipboard in hand. "Almost. One of the sterilization kits was delayed, but I called the supplier myself. It'll be here within the hour." Belle gave a curt nod. "Good. We start with the cleft pallet cases at noon. I'll handle the pre-op consultations." "Got it." He hesitated before adding, "You run this place well, Belle. It feels alive here." "Because we built it for people, not prestige," she replied simply, then walked toward the patient tents. Throughout the morning, she worked seamlessly, checking charts, speaking softly with anxious parents, kneeling beside children to explain the surgeries. Daniel observed from a distance, struck by the ease with which she brought calm to chaos. At lunch, as the medical team gathered in the canteen tent, Belle sat at the far end with her coordinators, going over reports. Daniel approached quietly, a paper cup of coffee in hand. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She glanced up, expression unreadable, then nodded. For a moment, they ate in silence, the air thick with the hum of conversations around them. "I saw the plaque at the main entrance," Daniel said finally. "Perez Initiative for Rural Health, founded in partnership with the Quiserio Foundation." Belle looked up briefly. "Yes. The foundation gave us our first grant." "I heard the chairman insisted on it," Daniel said carefully. "Is it true he's your father?" Belle's fork stilled mid-air. She met his gaze, steady but quiet. "That's correct. But I earned my place here, Daniel. I didn't inherit it." He nodded slowly. "I believe you did. You always fought harder than anyone I knew." Belle said nothing, her focus back on the files. The compliment hung in the air, sincere but cautious. Then Daniel spoke again, voice lower. "Belle, about that day, at EDV. I've replayed it more times than I care to admit." She didn't look at him, but her hand tightened slightly around her pen. "I should have stopped her," he continued. "I saw what she was doing, and I froze. I let fear of my career dictate my silence. I watched you being humiliated, and I did nothing. You have every right to hate me for that." Belle closed her folder, then finally met his eyes. "I did hate you," she said quietly. "For a long time. Not just because you didn't stop her, but because you pretended afterward that nothing had happened. That was worse." Daniel's throat tightened. "You're right. I pretended because facing it meant facing what kind of man I was." She studied him for a long moment. "And what kind of man are you now?" He exhaled slowly. "Trying to be one who can make amends, not by apologizing, but by doing the work that should have been done back then." Belle leaned back, her gaze softening slightly. "Then do the work, Daniel. That's all anyone can do. The conversation ended there, not with forgiveness, but with a small, fragile understanding. That afternoon, during the first surgery, Belle stood beside Daniel in the operating room. They worked in sync, her steady hands guiding his as they repaired the child's palate. The nurses whispered afterward that it was like watching two rhythms find harmony again. When the surgery ended, Belle stepped outside, pulling off her gloves. The sun was setting beyond the hills, painting the sky in gold and rose. Daniel joined her a few minutes later, his voice quiet. "You were incredible in there," he said. Belle smiled faintly, not turning. "We were saving a child, Daniel. That's all that matters." He looked at her profile, the same quiet fire, the same grace under pressure. He wondered how someone could endure so much humiliation and still walk with that kind of calm. "Belle," he said softly, "thank you for letting me stay." She looked at him then, really looked. "You earned your place here today. Don't waste it." As the last light faded, they stood side by side, silent but not estranged. And for the first time in years, something shifted between them, not reconciliation, not romance, just the first hint of trust being rebuilt, one surgery, one heartbeat at a time. 3 months later, Belle sat in her modest office overlooking the hospital courtyard. The outreach program had expanded faster than anyone expected. New mobile units were launching across rural Kenya and Uganda. But as she reviewed the latest correspondence from the World Health Secretariat, a certain letter on her desk remained unopened. It bore the seal of EDV Medical Center. Her eyes lingered on it for a long time. The last time she'd stepped foot in that place, she was being dragged from the floor, humiliated, and called Hickey Girl. Now they were writing to her. A soft knock broke her reverie. Daniel stood in the doorway, holding a folder. "You got one too," he said quietly. Belle looked up. "A letter." He nodded, closing the door behind him. "EDV is under federal investigation. Apparently, someone reopened the internal misconduct files from that year, the harassment, the cover-ups, the financial irregularities. They're calling former staff to testify." Belle's expression didn't change, but her fingers brushed the envelope absently. "So they're finally cleaning house." Daniel moved closer. "They're also asking for your statement, Belle. They want you to confirm the harassment report, the one the committee buried." Belle stood, crossing to the window. Outside, the nurses were laughing with children in the play tent, a bright sound that contrasted with the heaviness in her chest. "I'm not sure it matters anymore," she said. "I've moved on. We both have." Daniel frowned. "It matters. Because women are still working there. Because the same systems that tried to break you are still in place. You changed everything for the people here, but you can't pretend that past doesn't exist." She turned toward him, her tone calm but edged. "And what about you, Daniel? If I testify, your name will resurface too. You were part of that department." "I know," he said quietly. "And if that's what it takes for the truth to come out, then so be it." The silence between them deepened, not cold, but weighted with resolve. Belle finally tore open the envelope. The official letter invited her to appear before the National Medical Ethics Board in Geneva, where the EDV case was being reviewed. Her eyes moved over the words slowly. Then she exhaled. "Looks like they want us both there." Daniel nodded. "I already told them I'd go. But I won't unless you do." Belle studied him, searching for the hint of hesitation she used to associate with him. This time, there was none. "Fine," she said at last. "We'll go. But not for them, for everyone who never had a voice." 2 weeks later, the boardroom in Geneva buzzed with quiet tension. Reporters waited outside, cameras flashing. Inside, Belle sat beside Daniel at the witness table, her posture straight, her hands calm. The chairwoman began, "Dr. Isabel Perez, you were an intern at EDV during the period of the alleged misconduct. Please recount your experience." Belle spoke evenly, her voice carrying both restraint and power. She told them everything, the harassment, the humiliation, the silence that followed. Her words cut cleanly through the room, unembellished but undeniable. When she finished, the chairwoman looked visibly shaken. "Dr. Perez, you've demonstrated extraordinary courage." Belle gave a polite nod. "Courage should never have been required," she said softly. Then Daniel spoke. "If I may," he said, rising. The board turned toward him. "I was a resident then. I witnessed much of what happened, and I failed to act. My silence made me complicit. I'm here to take responsibility." His confession landed like a shockwave. The lawyers exchanged glances. Bell's eyes flickered toward him, unreadable. When the session ended, reporters flooded the hallways. But Bell and Daniel didn't stop to speak. They walked together out into the cold Geneva air. "At the curb," Daniel said quietly, "you didn't have to defend me in there." "I didn't," Bell replied. "You defended yourself." He smiled faintly. "You always were sharper than I deserved." She almost smiled back. Almost. "You're learning." They stood there in silence as snow began to fall. The city lights reflected in the glass towers above them, and for a brief moment everything felt still. Then Bell said, "When this is over, I'm returning to Nairobi. There's another mission next month, in Rwanda." Daniel nodded. "Then I'll see you there. If you'll have me." Bell looked at him, the man who had once represented everything she despised, and saw someone trying, genuinely, to rebuild himself. "Fine," she said, walking toward the waiting car. "But this time, you follow my lead." He smiled softly. "Always." As she got in, Belle glanced once more at the sky, snowflakes melting on the glass. The past was finally closing behind her, not erased, but transformed. She whispered to herself, almost inaudible, "Justice isn't revenge. It's restoration." Then the car pulled away, carrying her toward another dawn, and another chance to heal what once was broken.